The morning sun poured gently into Amina's small living room as she hurried about, humming to herself. Today was Jabari's 7th birthday, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Balloons in bright colors were tied to the chairs, paper streamers hung across the walls, and the smell of freshly baked cake filled the air. Amina had stayed up late the night before, wrapping small gifts and arranging tables for food. She wanted her son to feel celebrated, to know how deeply he was loved. Her heart swelled with pride as she looked around at the cheerful decorations. For her, this wasn't just another birthday party. It was a chance to bring her family closer. Relatives had been invited, neighbors too, and she imagined laughter filling the house, children running around with sticky fingers, and Jabari's face lighting up as he blew out his candles. In the kitchen, Amina checked the cake one more time. It was a simple chocolate sponge, but she had added extra icing and written his name across it in careful, shaky letters. She pictured him smiling wide when he saw it. To her, that smile would be worth every ounce of effort. Kato, her husband, stood by the doorway, adjusting his shirt collar. He leaned toward her and promised with a grin, "I'll make this day unforgettable." Amina smiled, trusting his words, her heart warmed by the thought of celebrating as one happy family. Little did she know, unforgettable it would be, but not in the way she dreamed. The house was alive with noise and happiness as relatives began to arrive. Children ran in and out, chasing each other through the doorway, while the adults carried trays of food and gifts. Laughter mixed with the smell of pilau and roasted meat. Amina moved between the kitchen and the sitting room, greeting everyone with hugs, making sure plates were filled, and that Jabari felt like the star of the day. He was surrounded by cousins, proudly wearing his new birthday shirt, a wide grin plastered on his face. Everything seemed just as Amina had hoped, joyful, warm, and full of love. Then the room shifted, the chatter softened, and a few heads turned toward the door. Kato had arrived, but he wasn't alone. Walking in beside him was a tall, striking woman with flawless makeup, long hair cascading over her shoulders, and a dress that seemed to hug her every move. She held tightly onto Kato's arm, her smile bold, as though she belonged there. For a moment, Amina froze. She blinked, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. Kato cleared his throat and almost too casually said, "This is Adanna, a friend from work." His words came out awkward, stiff, and unconvincing. Amina forced a polite smile, her mind spinning. But it wasn't just the introduction. It was the way Adanna's hand lingered on Kato's arm, the way he leaned slightly toward her, and the secret glances they shared when they thought no one was watching. Amina saw it all, and so did everyone else. Conversations slowed. Some guests exchanged puzzled looks. Others whispered behind their hands. Children didn't notice, but the adults did. Amina's stomach tightened as she tried to hold her composure. She kept moving, serving juice, laughing at jokes, clapping when Jabari showed off his birthday gifts. Yet her eyes couldn't help but catch every little touch between Kato and this so-called friend. A soft brush of their fingers, a smile that lingered too long, a closeness that no colleague should have. The whispers grew. One aunt leaned into another, murmuring, "Did you see how she walked in with him?" A neighbor shook her head, muttering under her breath, "This is not right, not at all." The energy in the room changed, less warmth, more curiosity, and a growing sense of unease. Amina's chest ached, but she swallowed the pain. She had worked so hard for this day, for her son's happiness, and she wasn't going to let her heartbreak ruin his moment. Still, in the back of her mind, a quiet storm was beginning to rise. Something was deeply wrong, and though she stood smiling, she could feel the ground beneath her trembling. What was supposed to be Jabari's happiest day had just taken a sharp, unexpected turn, and Amina could sense that everyone in that room felt it too. The party carried on, but the air in the room had shifted. When it was time to gather around the main table for cake, Amina took a deep breath and tried to steady her emotions. She wanted this moment to be about Jabari, to see his little face glow as everyone sang for him. She walked to the table, ready to take her place beside her son and her husband. But before she could, Adanna slid gracefully into the seat right next to Kato, her hand brushing his arm like it belonged. Kato didn't move her away. Instead, he leaned toward her, smiling as though the two of them shared a private joke. Amina felt a lump form in her throat, but she kept her back straight, holding on to her dignity. When the cake was brought out, Jabari's eyes sparkled. Everyone began singing the birthday song. Amina leaned closer, wanting to guide her son through the candle blowing and the cake cutting. But then, to her shock, Kato picked up the knife and, without even looking at her, placed it into Adanna's hand. Together, the two of them held the knife and cut into the cake, smiling at each other as though they were the proud parents. Amina's heart shattered in that instant. It was supposed to be her moment, her family's moment. She had baked and decorated that cake with love, imagining standing beside her son, helping him cut the first slice. Now, she stood there frozen, watching another woman take her place while her husband let it happen. The guests didn't know where to look. Some stared in disbelief. Others exchanged uneasy glances. A few shook their heads quietly, embarrassed for Amina. Whispers spread around the table. "Why would he do that?" one relative muttered. Another sighed. "Poor Amina. Imagine being treated like that in front of everyone." Still, Amina forced a smile, clapping for her son as though nothing was wrong. She refused to let her pain spill out in front of him. Jabari, too young to understand the tension, laughed happily as he licked frosting off his finger, unaware of the storm swirling around. Then, as if to drive the knife deeper, Adanna looked straight at Amina and gave a small, smug smile. It was quick, subtle enough that only Amina caught it, but it carried a clear message: "I've taken your place." The humiliation burned, but Amina stayed silent. Her hands trembled, but she folded them neatly in her lap. Inside, her heart screamed, but her face showed nothing but calm. For her son, she would not break down. Yet everyone in that room saw it. They saw how Amina had been pushed aside, how her husband had allowed another woman to step into her place. The laughter had dimmed, the joy had cracked, and beneath it all, pity for Amina filled the air. Amina sat quietly in the corner of the living room, her eyes following Jabari as he played with his cousins, his laughter rising above the low murmurs of the adults. On the outside, she appeared calm, smiling politely whenever someone caught her eye. But inside, her chest was heavy, a storm of emotions tearing through her. Anger, sadness, shame, betrayal. All of it pressed against her heart at once, threatening to spill over. She thought about everything she had done for this family. All the late nights she had spent sewing clothes for clients just to bring in extra money. The times she had walked home in the dark after long shifts because Kato didn't have fare to pick her up. She remembered how she had encouraged him when his small business collapsed, how she had stood by his side when others mocked him for failing. She had believed in him when no one else did. Every sacrifice she made had been for their marriage, for their child, for the dream of building a home filled with love and respect. And yet here she was. On their son's birthday of all days, Kato had the audacity to walk in with another woman, to parade her in front of family, neighbors, and even their child. He had taken what should have been a moment of unity and turned it into a cruel spectacle. The humiliation cut deeper than words could express. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw the plates off the table, to demand answers, to drag Adanna out by her perfectly styled hair. Another part of her wanted to cry, to run into her bedroom and bury her face in a pillow, to release the ache in her chest. But Amina did neither. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. She knew tears would not heal her pain, and anger would only give them more satisfaction. So she chose silence. She chose calm. She chose to watch. From her quiet seat, she studied every movement, how Kato leaned toward Adanna, how she whispered something into his ear and laughed softly, how his hand brushed against hers without hesitation. She saw the way her relatives whispered, some shaking their heads in disgust, others looking at her with pity they dared not voice aloud. It hurt. Every second hurt. But Amina understood something in that moment. She didn't need to fight to prove her worth. The truth was already showing itself, and the shame wasn't hers to carry. She sat tall, even as her heart cracked, reminding herself that she had given her all to this marriage. If Kato chose to throw it away, then it was on him, not her. The storm inside her raged, but her face remained calm. She would not let him see her break. She would not give Adanna the victory of watching her collapse. Instead, she waited quietly because she knew deep down this story was far from over. As the party carried on, Amina stayed seated, her eyes calm but her heart still heavy. She was determined not to make a scene, no matter how much the betrayal stung. She clapped when the children played a game, handed out plates of cake, and nodded politely whenever someone spoke to her. But beneath her collected face, her thoughts were racing, every laugh between Kato and Adanna like salt on an open wound. Then, as she leaned down to pick up a napkin from the floor, her cousin Miriam slid quietly beside her. Miriam's eyes darted toward Adanna, then back to Amina, and she lowered her voice to a whisper. "Do you know who that woman is? She's not single, Amina. She's married to a very wealthy businessman in Kisumu." The words hit like lightning. Amina froze, her hand tightening around the napkin. Married? The glamorous woman clinging to her husband, the one smirking at her as if she had already won. She was another man's wife? For a second, Amina thought maybe Miriam was mistaken. But Miriam's expression was firm. She nodded slowly, confirming the truth. Shock spread through Amina's chest, but along with it came something else, clarity. Her sadness began to shift. Her anger took a new shape. For hours she had sat quietly, swallowing her pain, feeling helpless while everyone whispered about her humiliation. But now, suddenly, the story wasn't as one-sided as it seemed. Adanna was not only a mistress, she was a liar, betraying her own husband, just as Kato betrayed his wife. The thought brought a strange calm over Amina. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time that day, she didn't feel like the victim anymore. She felt something stronger stirring in her chest, a plan. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to fight. She didn't even need to confront Kato in front of everyone. No, she would do something better. She would let the truth reveal itself. Let Adanna's double life come crashing down in front of all these witnesses. She would strike, but silently. Amina leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched the pair across the table. Kato was laughing at something Adanna had said, unaware of the storm brewing beside him. Adanna reached for his hand under the table, smiling as if she was untouchable. But Amina now held something more powerful than anger, knowledge. And knowledge, she realized, could be a weapon sharper than any words she might scream. Her heart no longer raced with helpless pain. Instead, it beat steadily, fueled by purpose. She knew exactly what she needed to do. The humiliation that had burned so deeply a few moments ago began to fade, replaced with quiet determination. Amina sat tall, her face calm as ever. No one around her could tell, but inside, she was no longer just enduring. She was waiting for her moment to strike, and when it came, it would be devastating. The noise in the living room grew louder as the children played, and the adults tried to carry on with polite conversations, but Amina could barely hear any of it. Her mind was focused, sharp as a blade. Miriam's whisper still echoed in her head. She's married to a wealthy businessman in Kisumu. Amina stood slowly, smoothing down her dress, as though she were simply going to check on something in the kitchen. No one questioned her. Everyone's attention was still caught between the awkwardness of Kato flaunting Adanna and the innocent laughter of the children. She slipped away quietly, her footsteps steady though her pulse pounded in her ears. Inside the kitchen, away from the noise, Amina leaned against the counter for a moment, breathing deeply. The tiled walls seemed to close in around her, the hum of the fridge the only sound. She reached into her small handbag and pulled out her phone. Her hands didn't tremble, though her heart was racing. She already knew what she had to do. Miriam had given her the number earlier, whispering it into her ear like a secret weapon. Amina scrolled through her phone until she found it, then pressed call. Each ring felt heavy, like the pause before a storm. Finally, a deep male voice answered. Hello, who is this? Amina's throat felt dry, but her voice came out calm, steady, even softer than she expected. Good evening, Mr. Okoro. My name is Amina. I don't know how to tell you this, but your wife is here. At my son's birthday party. With my husband. There was silence on the other end. For a moment, Amina thought the call had dropped. Then she heard him breathe sharply, followed by a long pause. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, controlled, but full of restrained fury. Where exactly is this party? Amina gave him the address, her voice still calm. He repeated it back to her slowly, as if engraving it in his mind. Then he said only 4 words. I'm on my way. The line went dead. Amina lowered the phone, her chest tightening as the reality of what she had just set in motion hit her. Her legs felt slightly weak, so she gripped the edge of the counter. She closed her eyes, steadying her breathing. It was done. The truth was now out in the open, and the person with the most power to expose it was on his way. She slipped the phone back into her bag, smoothed her hair, and walked back toward the living room. From the doorway, she saw Kato laughing with Adanna, his hand resting too comfortably on hers, as if the world belonged to them. He had no idea what was coming. Amina's lips curved into the faintest smile. Her heart still raced, but not with fear anymore, with anticipation. The storm she had been holding inside was no longer hers to unleash. It was already on its way. The house was buzzing with chatter when the front door suddenly swung open with a loud bang. Heads turned at once. Standing there was a tall man with broad shoulders, dressed in a crisp suit despite the late hour. His presence filled the room, heavy and commanding. His eyes swept across the gathering like a storm searching for its target. Adanna! He barked, his voice thundering through the living room. The room froze. Children stopped playing, laughter died midair, and every adult turned in shock. Plates of food were left hanging in people's hands as silence swallowed the party. Adanna, who had been laughing softly at something Kato whispered, stiffened instantly. Her glass nearly slipped from her hand. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Kato stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Mr. Okoro, he stammered, caught completely off guard. He glanced at Adanna, then at the furious man at the door, his lips fumbling for words. This isn't what it looks like. Okoro stepped forward, his glare fixed on his wife. Not what it looks like. His voice was sharp, cutting through the room. Do you think I don't know where you've been? Do you think I don't know what you've been doing? Murmurs spread among the guests, eyes darting between the husband, the wife, and Kato. Amina stood quietly near the back, her expression calm, watching everything unfold exactly as she had known it would. Okoro didn't wait for excuses. He pulled out his phone from his pocket and raised it for all to see. Here, he snapped. Messages, calls, lies. She told me she was traveling for a church retreat. Instead, she's here, clinging to another woman's husband in front of her own child's birthday cake. Gasps rippled through the room. A few aunts covered their mouths in shock. Others shook their heads in disgust. Adanna tried to rise, her hands trembling. Please, it's not what you think. Not what I think. Okoro's voice cracked with anger. I have the receipts of the hotel bookings, the dates, the proof of every lie you told me. He turned sharply to Kato. And you thought you could parade my wife around like some trophy in front of your own family? In front of your son? Have you no shame? Kato's face flushed red. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words stumbled out as nothing more than weak stutters. She's just a friend. The crowd didn't buy it. Their eyes said it all. Disappointment, disgust, pity for Amina. Adanna's knees buckled, and she sank slowly back into her chair, her face hidden in her hand. Her perfect composure was shattered. Okoro's anger filled the room, but so did something else. The undeniable truth. The lies had been dragged into the light, and there was no hiding anymore. The birthday party had become a courtroom, and everyone there had just witnessed the verdict. The room was heavy with silence after Okoro's outburst. All eyes were fixed on Adanna, still hiding her face, and on Kato, who stood trembling in the middle of the chaos. For a moment he looked like a man cornered, his eyes darting from one relative to another, searching for support. Then, in a desperate move, he pointed toward Amina. This is her fault, he stammered, his voice cracking. She's the one who called him. She embarrassed me in front of everyone. She's been plotting against me. Gasps filled the room. Amina didn't flinch. She just stood tall, her expression calm. But the family wasn't fooled. An elderly uncle rose from his chair, his face stern. Kato, don't you dare put this on her. You brought another woman into your wife's home, into your son's birthday party, and you dare to shame her. Others joined in. We saw it with our own eyes, one aunt said firmly. You paraded that woman in front of us. You let her cut the cake meant for your wife. Do not twist the truth. Kato's shoulders slumped as whispers spread through the crowd. His own cousins, men who once respected him, shook their heads in disappointment. Neighbors murmured about the disgrace. How foolish it was to bring a mistress openly to a family gathering. His mother, who had been quiet all along, finally spoke, her voice trembling with shame. Kato, you have destroyed us today. You have humiliated your wife, your child, and even yourself. What kind of man does this? Kato opened his mouth again, but the strength in his words was gone. No one defended him. No one nodded in agreement. Every pair of eyes in that room had turned against him. The weight of their judgment pressed down on him, and he realized there was no escaping it. Adanna sat silently now, exposed and powerless, but the damage was already done. Kato's life, his reputation, his standing in front of his family, it was collapsing right before his eyes. He had thought he could juggle lies, that no one would dare question him. But the truth had come out louder than he ever imagined, and he had no shield left. Then came the most painful blow. Jabari, confused by the shouting and the tension, had been clinging to his mother's dress all along. When Kato reached for him, trying to soften his expression, the boy pulled away and tightened his grip around Amina's waist. His small voice whispered, I want to stay with you, Mama. The words pierced deeper than any insult. Kato's eyes filled with regret, but it was too late. His son had chosen his mother, instinctively sensing who stood by him and who had broken the family apart. The room no longer looked at Kato with anger alone. There was something worse in their gaze, disappointment, pity, and finality. He had not only lost his wife and son, but also the respect of every single person who once believed in him. That was the moment Kato truly fell. The living room felt different now. The chaos had settled, but the weight of what had just happened still hung thick in the air. Kato stood in the middle of it all, his face pale, his shirt damp with sweat, looking like a man who had lost everything in a single moment. Beside him, Adanna sat frozen, her perfect image shattered. Through it all, Amina remained calm. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't raised her voice or thrown a single insult. She had stood silently, allowing the truth to reveal itself. And now, everyone in that room saw her for what she truly was. Not a broken woman, not a victim, but a pillar of strength. Her aunts gathered around her, squeezing her hands. You are strong, Amina, one of them said softly. The way you held yourself today, we are proud of you. Another cousin shook her head in disbelief. Most women would have lost control, but you stood with such grace. Their words washed over her like gentle balm, reminding her she hadn't endured in vain. Okoro, still seething with anger at his wife, turned to Amina. His voice softened when he spoke to her. Thank you for calling me, he said firmly. Thank you for having the courage to tell me the truth. From here, I will handle her. You will not have to deal with this again. His words were not just gratitude. They were an acknowledgement of her quiet bravery. Amina nodded politely, but inside her chest she felt something deeper, a quiet victory. She hadn't needed to tear anyone down. She hadn't needed to make a scene. By simply standing tall and letting the truth speak, she had won. The shame and humiliation Kato had tried to throw on her had bounced back and landed squarely on him. Around the room, whispers of admiration grew. Relatives looked at her with respect, neighbors with newfound regard. She wasn't the woman abandoned or humiliated by her husband. She was the woman who had carried herself with dignity when the world tried to break her. Meanwhile, Kato was left with nothing. He stood alone, unable to meet anyone's eyes, his attempts to explain drowned by the thick silence of disappointment. The celebration that he had promised would be unforgettable had indeed become unforgettable, but for all the wrong reasons. His son clung tightly to Amina's hand, refusing to go near him. His family had turned against him. His mistress had been exposed. And there he was, a man stripped of his pride, standing in the ruins of what should have been his child's happiest day. Amina didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence had been her weapon, her composure her shield. By the time the evening ended, everyone knew exactly who had won. And it wasn't the woman with the glamorous dress, nor the man who thought he was untouchable. It was Amina, quiet, steady, unbroken. Weeks passed after the disastrous birthday party, and life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. Amina, carrying herself with the same quiet strength she had shown that night, went to the courthouse and filed for separation. It wasn't an easy decision. Years of memories, sacrifices, and love were tied to that marriage. But she knew her dignity and peace were worth more than holding on to a man who had betrayed her so deeply. Her focus shifted fully to Jabari. She poured her energy into making sure he felt safe, loved, and happy. She also threw herself into her tailoring business, working long but fulfilling hours at her sewing machine. Word spread quickly through the community about what had happened, and instead of gossip tearing her down, support began to build her up. Neighbors and relatives brought her business, recommending her skills to others. What once had been a small side hustle grew into something steady, something she could be proud of. Kato, on the other hand, fell hard. The whispers about him followed everywhere he went. No one trusted him, no one respected him. Jobs slipped away, and his name became a shadow of shame. Desperate, he came knocking on Amina's door, begging for forgiveness, promising he had changed. But Amina only looked at him with calm eyes and said nothing. Her silence was louder than any answer. She had already moved on. One evening, as Jabari laughed and kicked a ball in the small yard outside their home, Amina sat watching him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "He thought he could destroy me with his mistress. But today, I took my power back." And she meant it.